Hello everyone and welcome to this final webinar about the Higg FEM verification trail. We have come to the last section, to chemicals management. This is the longest section and perhaps the most complex section in the Higg FEM. And I'm looking forward to spending the next one and a half hour together with you. And my name is Karin Ekberg and I am the CEO and founder of Leadership and Sustainability. We have been around now for 6.5 years, so quite a long time already. And I'm also a chemical specialist verifier and trainer and a BRM verifier. And we also work on many other projects in the supply chain, supporting facilities to improve their performance in both the environmental and the social area, but also at group level and brand level with brands and retailers to develop sustainability strategies and other projects, carbon footprinting, for example. All right, and the GoToWebinar control panel, I guess that many of you are recurring participants as well, so you have already heard this. But anyway, I will just go through this. We are, or you are all on mute today in order to make sure that we have a good audio quality. And I will also hold my camera off today in order to make sure that, that we have a good transmission of the data. But you are really welcome to send us your questions throughout this entire webinar in the question function. And you can see how it works here. You will open up the question box and then you can enter your question and you send it off to me. And for all of you, as an information, you will receive an email after this webinar where you will receive the documentation, the presentation deck, and also the recording of this webinar. So rest assured, you don't need to sharpen your pencil and take notes. You can lean back and listen in to this webinar. And also as a reminder, all this material is copyrighted. Okay, so the main topic today is chemicals management. Obviously, we will also have time for questions and a discussion. And towards the end, I will also show you our verifier team and our global team of leadership and sustainability. But let's go there to the chemicals management section. And so, as a starter, where are chemicals used in the facilities? Well, it depends, of course, what type of production you have. But here is a good example. Dyeing and tanning is a typical example of where chemicals are used. And then we have fabric finishing, for example, for durable water repellent, chemical formulations, etc. We have screen printing with solvents and inks, very often with organic solvents, but perhaps you have also already moved over to water-based inks, which of course are less harmful for the people working and for the environment. And then we have also metal finishing and plating chemicals. This is more for trim manufacturers. If you are producing buttons or zippers or other metal parts, you might have metal finishing. And in the metal finishing, in the plating baths, you can see here, those are baths where the plating and the metal finishing is taking place. So you use a lot of chemicals. You have large baths with a lot of chemicals in there. And of course, many of them are harmful. And then we also have the example with primers, cements, and adhesives. That might be, you can see here, a shoe. So this might be footwear manufacturing. And finally, we also have cleaning solvents like spot cleaners, for example. And many of them are also organic solvents based. There are also nowadays new water-based solutions here. But of course, the organic solvents are those that we would like to focus on when it comes to reducing the use of harmful chemicals. So this gives you an overview of where chemicals may be used in your facility. Then as you know, in all the sections, we have different applicability questions. And in the chemical section, it's also important to get it right, so to say. And so you need to include here information about which type of processes you have. So at the very beginning, there are lots of questions related to what type of processes you have, and you just need to mark that up accordingly and correctly. So you might have printing, dyeing, laundry or washing, cementing or gluing, leather tanning, fiber extrusion or yarn spinning, lamination, extrusion, metal finishing, welding, degreasing, for example, painting. You might have even printed electronic circuit boards and any other production processes that require chemicals. So there is a whole range of different processes that you might have where you would be using chemicals in your manufacturing processes. And this is the differentiation we have in the chemical section of the Higg FEM. So what is important is to understand if you are using your chemicals in the actual production processes. And otherwise, you might be using it only in facility tooling and or operations, for example, for cleaning or greasing, etc., of machines. But the important is to find out, are you using chemicals in the production processes? And if you are, you will receive all the questions in the Higg FEM chemical section. If you are not using chemicals in your production processes, then you will have slightly less questions to respond to. So some of the questions at levels 1, 2, and 3 will be removed for you. All right, and then we come to the overview. The chemicals management section is the most comprehensive one with the highest number of questions. And you see here already at level 1, we have 13 questions for those of you who are using chemicals in your manufacturing process. And as you know, at level 1, it's really about understanding and tracking performance. But already at quite a high level, although it's level 1, it's still quite challenging. And as you remember, in order to be able to move on to levels 2 and 3, you will need to respond to all questions at level 1 with a yes or a partial yes. So if there is only one question where you have to respond no, then you will not be able to move on to levels 2 and 3. And yes, you see there is a lot about inventory, SDS, training, but then also several questions related to RSL and MRSL, the restricted substances list and the manufacturing restricted substances list. And then at level 2, we have only 3 questions actually. And remember, this level is worth 50 points. So level 1 is worth 25 points, level 2 is worth 50 points, and level 3 is worth another 25 points. And at level 3, we have 7 questions. And level 3 is actually very challenging for many facilities. These are really challenging questions. Okay, so now let's move on to the first question with a chemical inventory. And this might seem like a simple question, but there are actually several sub-questions here. And here again, it's really important to keep this right. And of course, to have a complete and comprehensive inventory with a lot of information in it is the basis for a good chemicals management in your facility. So this is the starting point, and it is really very important. So the question is, does your facility keep an inventory of chemicals used and the suppliers of each chemical product? And then you say yes, and then you should include information if you have the inventory for all chemicals used in your manufacturing processes, if you have it for all chemicals used in tooling and equipment, and if you have it for all chemicals used to operate and maintain the facility. And there is a template available provided by Serious Charge of Hazardous Chemicals at sea. You can click on this link here and then you can download a template there. All right, and here the SETI@C template, it is actually structured according to foundational, progressive, and aspirational levels. And then once you have responded yes and given information about which inventories you actually have, you will receive this question. Does your facility's chemical inventory include chemical identification data? And then you should check all that apply. And now comes a long list of different information that you might have available. Chemical name and type, supplier, vendor, the presence of safety data sheets, the function, the hazard classification, where the chemical is used, the storage conditions and location, quantities of the chemicals used, and then another next question comes exactly with the same question actually, but the content is a bit different. And here we are asking about CAS numbers, lot number, so chemical lot number, which is the number that you get from the chemical supplier. So it's his or her chemical lot number. Then MRSL compliance, purchase date, chemical expiration dates, if applicable. And the suggested upload is, of course, the inventory and the permits you might have, an action plan for obtaining data that is not included in your inventory. And sorry, I wanted to stay here a bit. And then, so we often also get the question, do you need to have the information in one place only so that you have everything in one place? No, that's not necessary. You need to have the information readily available, but it might be distributed over a few documents even. As long as you can pull it together and can show that you have the information available, even if it is in different documents, that is fine. And then I see that we already have a question here. Is CAS number mandatory? Yes, you should include the CAS number. It's not mandatory in that sense because, you know, in this question here, you should indicate which information you have available. If you don't have CAS number, you will still be able to move on to levels 2. So this question about CAS number will not hinder you from moving on. But of course, the CAS number is really good to have, and it should be available on the safety data sheet. You can find the CAS numbers. Okay, and then one more question here. Yes, some suppliers do not want to share CAS numbers. In this case, what can we do? Yeah, here you are actually, it's very, very difficult to barge in with those suppliers if they are not indicating the CAS number. In my view, it's very strange if they don't. They should really be able to do that. And yeah, but I'm aware that sometimes they might not want to include the CAS numbers. And of course, I guess that would be for less harmful chemicals. For harmful chemicals or potentially hazardous chemicals, it is really important that you do have the CAS numbers. All right, so now the next question is about safety data sheet. And here the question is, does your facility make safety data sheets available to employees for all chemicals used? And you can see this example here for formaldehyde, and actually here there is a CAS number included. It's not so easy for you to read here. It's also not meant to be possible to read really, but there is a CAS number included here. And then our safety data sheets posted where hazardous chemicals are stored or used, of course. And then are they available in language workers understand? And so here it is, of course, very important that you have the safety data sheet information available in local language so that the workers really can read them and can understand them. And then the upload that is suggested is some photo images showing that the SDS are available and accessible to employers, and then also a few examples of the safety data sheet. So in my view, into the Higg FEM, you don't need to upload all the safety data sheets you may have, but of course, during verification, you should be able to show them to the verifier. And then you might have CLP compliant label in the cases where the safety data sheet is actually not available. And then we have the typical safety data sheet content if it is aligned with a globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals. You will have the different sections, and you can see here section 2 is a really important one, hazard identification, section 3 composition, section 4 first aid measures, etc. So this is standardized, and you should have all these information included in your SDS if they are aligned with the GHS. And then here are some best practice example. And so you should have, of course, people in charge who can manage and update the SDS documentation, ensure that there are procedures and staff responsible for chemical procurement and receiving the chemicals in order to understand how to handle them, and then have procedures and dedicated staff who regularly review the SDS. And we think that it is considered a good practice to request updated version of the SDS every 3 years. Of course, there may be local laws that ask you to do it more often, and then of course you need to follow your local law. And so, but at least 3 years. So please don't leave them for 10 years without checking in if they should be updated. And of course, if the chemical composition has been changed, then an updated SDS is also important or is necessary to collect. Okay, we have one question here. Expiration date is mandatory in label. No, I don't think it is. I don't think it is, because in some cases it may be several years or so. So I'm not sure that that is really mandatory. Yeah. Good. All right. So here is a good example of SDS that have been made available here. So post them or maintain them in a binder where the chemicals are used. And you should just make sure that it is easy and that you can reach the necessary information quite fast. And then we see that quite often also in facilities, and I think this is a good thing to do. Those are simplified safety data sheet that can be created and posted in chemical storage and use areas. And here you have a very fast, you can get an overview of the chemical. And so, of course, the simplified safety data sheets, they are not a substitute for the full safety data sheet. So you still need to keep the complete and comprehensive safety data sheet available at some place. All right, employee training. Does your facility train all employees who use chemicals on their hazards, risk, proper handling, and what to do in case of emergencies or spill? And most facilities would say, yes, we do. But very often when we ask then for the actual training documentation, there is not so much available, perhaps just the attendee list. And I would like to see that you develop a really good presentation deck, for example, a PowerPoint that you can use as a training material. And then also you can show, you can hand it out to the employees, and you can also show the verifier what you have covered in your training. And then So it's good if you can upload a sample training and the content, number of employees trained, and the frequency of the training conducted. So you remember that in the FEM 2020, those additional questions were added to many of those training questions. Next question is about the emergency response plan. Does your facility have a chemical spill and emergency response plan that is practiced periodically? And you see an example here on this picture here. And then the suggested upload is the training content or the plan, the emergency response plan, and how you do the practice, the number of employees trained or that were included in the practice, and the frequency of the training conducted. And then, of course, also the emergency response plan or the procedure that you might have. And so what we expect here, we do expect to see an updated emergency response plan for the entire facility, detailed instructions on how to evacuate the building, the primary and secondary escape routes, and then the emergency response leaders should be assigned specific duties. For example, of course, it's very important that you make sure that all workers have actually left the facility or the room or the building where an accident has taken place. And of course, if you have disabled workers, these also need to have specific guidance and support from the emergency response leader. And then, of course, stairways should always be kept free of materials that could block or hinder an evacuation process. And then we would like to see also regular fire drills, and that they should be treated as if they were actually an emergency. So it's not for fun, so to say. They should be very serious, kept the drills. And then, of course, the contact details for the fire department and also your internal emergency response leaders is important as well. An emergency shower and eye wash station, we don't see too much of those in factories, and sometimes they're also not working. So you need to check that they are working from time to time, that there is actually water available and then with enough pressure in the shower and in the eye wash station. You should also have a first aid kit available. Yeah. And now we come over to the question number 5 about safety equipment. Does your facility have appropriate and operable protective and safety equipment? And then the next question is about chemical hazard signage. Does your facility have the chemical hazard signage and safe handling equipment in the areas of the facility where chemicals are used? So everywhere you need to have the correct signage, and it should be consistent throughout the factory. We very, very seldom see a plan of the entire factory with indication of which signage you need throughout the factory. And so sometimes you see one type of signage, sometimes you see another, and it is posted in different locations. Sometimes when you enter a room, for example, at the door of at the outside of the door, which would be important because you do need to know everything about the safety measures before you enter the room. And then you need to repeat that same information in the room, but only to have it, for example, inside the room is not enough because, of course, the person who enters that room, let's say it is the chemical storage room, that person needs to have the appropriate PPE already installed, so to say. And then also, do you have the safe handling equipment available? So the signages there should be clearly visible and understood by the employees and workers. You see some example here of some hazard symbols. And yes, and they need to be according to the type of hazard. And then, of course, you should have the handling equipment available as well. And here you see some examples. You see here the signage at the outside of the building. And now let's move over to the next question, number 7, about MRSL and RSL. And the question is sorry, this is first just the introduction about what is RSL and MRSL. So the RSL includes information about the chemicals that are restricted in the end product. And you can see here in this picture, we have the factory, we have the air, we have wastewater, and then we have the product coming out of the factory. And the restricted substances list includes specifications on which chemicals that are restricted on the final product. So which levels you are not allowed to exceed for specific chemicals on the final product. So this is the restricted substances list. And then we have the manufacturing restricted substances list, which is basically a 10-year-old phenomenon now. And those are the chemicals that are restricted in the manufacturing processes. So in the chemicals that go into the factory. So that is why it is illustrated like this. And the MRSL is there for the safety of the workers and of the environment. And very often the MRSL and the RSL are very tightly coupled. So they are very much linked to each other. But as you know, lots of reactions can take place inside the factory, which means that even though you know the MRSL that come in, you might not have full control over the chemicals that actually go out on the product, because there might have chemical reactions might have been taking place here in the factory. And you can download the SETIET-C MRSL. This is the most widely used manufacturing restricted substances list in our sector. There might also be some brands that have their own MRSL, and then of course you would need to adhere to this MRSL as well. And the question number 7 now is, does your facility select and purchase chemicals based on their hazards and MRSL and RSL requirements? And if yes, do all chemicals purchased and used in production meet the facility's chemical purchasing policy? And if no, do you have a process or plan for eliminating chemicals that do not meet the facility's chemical purchasing policy? So you actually also need to have a purchasing policy that includes the requirements to maintain compliance to MRSL and RSL. So you need to make sure that your chemical suppliers, that they follow these rules for you. And I see we have another question here. Yeah, here, MRSL is inlet and RSL is outlet. That's correct. Thank you. Yes, and here we also have some examples. The purchasing procedure should cover the CAS number control, MRSL and RSL declaration. So the chemical suppliers, you should ask them to declare that their chemicals are compliant with MRSL and RSL. And the same, of course, comes true if you are buying fabrics, for example, from a dye house or so. Then you should also ask them to comply with those requirements. So anything you purchase that has something to do with chemicals, the chemicals themselves or the textiles, they need all to conform. Test reports, certificates, positive lists if applicable, and then you also have the SETIET-C MRSL conformance level that where you might find information from some chemicals and some chemical suppliers. Let me see, we have one more. It was just a comment. Good. Great. Health and safety, question number 8. Does your facility have an environmental and occupational health and safety program specific to chemicals management? And the upload we suggest is a letter of appointment, job descriptions, organization chart, team experience and training records and procedures related to the chemical storage, handling, usage and disposal, permits, chemical incident, accident and spill records. Sorry. So I wanted to go back to this question to just see here. This is really about having a program in place, and obviously a program for occupational health and safety is quite a large project to have in place and should of course be on a daily basis as well. And that's why we see so many examples of the uploads that you should have available in order to fulfill and in order to show that you actually have a comprehensive program for occupational health and safety. And then here there are measures to safeguard workers from hazardous chemicals, and this is also a sort of a hierarchy, and you should begin with the highest level here. That is the best you can do. The even better would be to not use chemicals at all or avoid certain applications of chemicals. And if you cannot do that, you can replace with lower toxicity chemicals. You can have process changes in order to reduce exposure potential. For example, perhaps you have had an open process where organic solvents are openly used, and now you install fume hoods so that you have a flow out of the organic chemicals, for example, which would then reduce the exposure potential. You can also isolate chemicals. You can, of course, have ventilation and engineering controls. You can have PPE, personal protective equipment, and then the final response is, of course, an incident response in case of an accident or of a spill. So those are the different measures. So please remember this. It is not only about PPE. You can see PPE is quite low in priority. The higher priority are the ones up here. And I see we have another question. I'm not sure I understand this question. How can we verify the Ocotex chemical list? Could you explain that question a bit more, please? And I will go on to the next question here. So now we come to chemical storage. And this question is also one of the longer questions, and it is very, very important. How you store your chemicals will impact your total chemical management and your total situation when it comes to chemicals management. So the question is, does your facility have well-marked designated chemical storage and temporary storage areas? And here comes a long list of requirements related to the storage. The chemical storage area should be ventilated. The storage area should be protected from unauthorized employees. It should have an easy entry and exit in emergencies. The storage container should be in good condition. And here are some examples of storage with the secondary containment here, for example, oil and lubricant storage. And then there is some information here about the secondary containment. So it is considered good practice that the secondary containment should be at least 110% of the volume of the largest container stored and greater than 10% of the total volume of the stored substances. And here you see some examples of good practice when it comes to storage and when it comes to secondary containment. And we also see some examples of good practice here. And for example, you have the chemical separation here, and this is actually not a good practice, of course. Here you can see that this is an acid storage, and you can see that the metal has been degraded here by the acid, so the metal rack here. And so this is actually not a good example. And then I also want to stress why the chemical storage is so important. And it's not just one question in the Higg FEM, just like that. It is a really, really important area to manage. And that is because there is always, when it comes to chemicals, storage or handling or usage, there is always a risk for soil and groundwater contamination. So if you have a leakage of chemicals into the underground, you might cause contamination of the soil and or groundwater. And this is very, very costly to clean up and takes a long, long time as well to do. And so my question to you is, are you aware if you have this problem? Are you doing everything you can to avoid this problem? And so please consider this and please review your own practices. Please have a look in your facility that there are no, you often see some spots, for example, where you have had a leakage. And so if you have a leakage with a porous underground, the chemicals that are leaking, they might percolate into the underground and may cause soil contamination and or groundwater contamination. Next question is about employee training on MRSL and RSL. And so the question is, does your facility train employees responsible for the chemical management system on RSLs and MRSLs? And we often see here that perhaps one person has been trained or perhaps two persons, but it is actually important that anyone who handle chemicals, that they understand why there is an RSL and why there is an MRSL and how to deal with that. So please take care of this. And then you should then describe the RSL and MRSL trainings, and you should select all topics included in your training. So some facilities only have an RSL training, or some may have only an MRSL training. And so, of course, you need to indicate here which one of the MRSL and RSL you are covering in your training. And now, the question is here, if supplier provide Oeko-Tex chemical list, how can we verify this is Oeko-Tex chemical? Is there any online checking way, as like with the GOTS online platform? No, I don't think there is. So you can only check it probably by the certificate that has been issued to that supplier. And then we have one more question here. Someone started to write and just said, hi, Karin. Okay, good. And also information about how many employees that were trained and how frequently you train your employees. So you will recall that you have these follow-up questions for every training question in the Higg FEM. And now we come to the RSL compliance monitoring. Does your facility have a documented process to systematically identify, monitor, and verify compliance with all product RSLs? And so do you have that process in place to make sure that all your products that leave the factory, that are in compliance with the product RSLs? And then there is also a new question here, sorry. Does your facility have a failure resolution process that is followed in the event of an RSL test failure? So this is also important to consider and to have in place. So sometimes we hear the argument, well, we never had a case, so we have no process. But actually, the process needs to be in place whenever you would have a failure or a too high value of one of the RSL parameters, for example. So you need to do this proactively in order to make sure that you don't have any issues, and in order to make sure that you know how to handle any issues you might have. And I see that we have one more question here. Okay. This was just a comment again. All right. Good. So this failure resolution process, really important. And I think that many facilities are a bit weak here in this area and can improve this. Make sure you have that process in place. It can be quite a simple process, but it needs to make sure that you can really investigate the root cause of any failure you might have. Yeah. Okay. And the suggested upload, a written document specifying the review process and the process recipes, considering usage of the chemicals. And of course, all chemicals in your inventory, which means all chemicals that you are using, they need to have gone through this RSL compliance test. And if they have done it once, they are most of the time they should stay okay, unless you have changes in your recipes or if you have changes in how you are using your chemicals. And I have one question here. Hello, I'm working for the garment industry. Could you describe which one I should take RSL test? Our garment product example is t-shirt, pants, or fabric materials. Yes, very often if you are producing for a brand, then they would have given you their RSL and given you their test procedures. Many of the brands, they ask the facilities to test on the fabric materials, so to test on the fabric, because since in the garment factory, if you have a sewing process, cutting and sewing process, for example, the chemical composition of the fabric or of the product will not change, and then it would be more effective to do the testing on the actual fabric. But actually, it is your brand that would tell you exactly how they want you to do the test. Is it required to have a standard operating procedure or policy for RSL failure, or if practice exits, is it enough? No, I think it is very important that you do have a written process. So it doesn't need to be a document with 10 pages. Perhaps it's a one-pager, but it is important to have a documented process to show how you deal with any RSL failure. Yeah, and here we have one more. Yes, okay, that was just a hi. So I guess you will continue writing your question then. Okay, so again, the compliance monitoring, the letters of RSL conformance that you have received. And now we come to question 12, which is the same question as for the previous one for RSL, but this time now for MRSL. So does your facility have a documented process to systematically monitor, update, and demonstrate compliance with MRSLs? And segregate chemical formulation materials and products which are non-compliant with MRSL. So here, and this is an addition to this question, here it is asked that you also separate any chemical formulations that are not compliant with MRSL, so that you can have them separated and managed individually. And the suggested upload, a chemical review policy and process flow, and it is also allowed to have it from the parent company or group. We have seen sometimes if you belong to a group of factories with a mother company that perhaps have their own sustainability documentation, then you can use their documentation when it comes to RSL, MRSL compliance. Of course, you need to use it locally, so to say, so you need to have your local examples on how you have applied it as well. And then the list of chemicals which do not have full documentation regarding conformance with MRSL, and also any plan you might have for obtaining the appropriate documentation for chemicals if they do not have the correct documentation right now. Furthermore, the MRSLs that are applicable to the facility, you should upload them, any positive lists you may be using, and any email communication or communication trail, a letter of compliance to MRSL, and documented periodical screening process against the ZTHC chemical gateway. This is not mandatory, but if you are using it and if you have it, then it is fine. And then also any dated records of previous screenings and schedule of future screening that you have. All right, and now we are coming to the last question at level 1, the chemical traceability question. And I know that this question is challenging. And the question is, can all of your production chemicals be traced from the manufacturing process back to chemical inventory? And this is only possible if you actually have in all your recipes, if you actually have also the lot numbers included. So the suggested upload here are recipe cards with lot numbers, the chemical inventory, the chemical mixing process log. And here you see an example of what it may look like. You have, it's backwards, so to say, you have the product. And let's say you have a dyeing step. And here you have the recipe to produce a blue t-shirt with different chemicals that you include here, the process steps, etc. And here is where we need to have also all the different lot numbers. And here you have, for example, for the formulation 1, you have for the blue colorant, you have a dye, a binding agent, etc. And here you need to have included into that recipe, you should have also the lot number. And why is that? Well, it is because you need to be able to trace back. So here we are in the actual manufacturing process. And if you have any failure here or later, you need to be able to go and check which chemicals exactly were used and from which lot number from the chemical supplies were they used. Because in the chemical production, there are different lots, and perhaps many of them are okay, but then there is one lot where there was one error made or one mistake made, so that the chemical composition was different than in the usual production, in the normal production. And you can only find this if you actually know the specific chemical lot number, because then you can go back to the chemical supplier with the chemical lot number and tell him, I used your chemical, whatever name it is, with this lot number, and now I have a problem with and a failure with my product or with my process. And then they should be able to trace then back and be able to explore and investigate and do their root cause analysis according to the lot number that you gave them. And I see that we have one question here. Yes, I'm working at a washing plant. Most of the chemical suppliers do not reveal the details of chemical formulations, including CAS number and compound names. Is there any possible way to screen chemical composition and the CAS number? Well, there are ways, of course, because you can do an analysis. You can do a chromatography, for example, of the actual compounds or the chemical formulations you are using, and then you can find out which chemical composition there is. But of course, this is very, very costly to do. And in this case, you need to be very strict with your chemical suppliers. You should push them and ask if they can provide you with this information. But then if they cannot, it is even more important that they guarantee that they are conforming to the RSLs and MRSLs that you are using. So you need to push them back then and really require them to declare their conformance. And then here we have another question. If you have an RSL failure, how can we investigate the root cause, and how can we do that? Well, if you have an RSL fail, and you can trace, and you know exactly which product with your product number, and then according to this picture here, you can go back to your production process and to the recipe used to produce that particular product, that individual product. And then you look at the recipe, and if you believe that there is something with the chemical formulations used in this recipe, then you would need to check all those lot numbers. So you might need to do your own analysis. Respectively, you might need to go back to the chemical supplier and ask them to investigate, or ask them to even do their own quality checks retrospectively. And there might be other causes also. So there might be that perhaps you use the wrong volumes or amounts of the chemicals. Perhaps the process was not run the way it should have been. So this is of course then depending on your actual processes, and you need to investigate it accordingly. All right. Good. So that was level 1, and now we are at level 2. And the first question here is actually related to all the questions at level 1. Does your facility have an implementation plan to improve your chemicals management program? And here, SAC and Higg FEM would like to see that you take a look at all the questions at level 1, all the 13 questions, and see is there anything I can improve based on this? And some facilities, they say that they don't have anything they can improve, but actually, I think with so many questions, there is something you can improve. Perhaps you don't have all the information available in the inventory. Perhaps you can collect some more information there, or there is something else that you can improve then. And suggested upload would be which questions that were not fully achieved and why. So if you have partial yes responses, for example, then you can explain why this was, why you had partial yes here, and what you are planning to do in order to be able to say a yes. And so this is should be a comprehensive implementation plan then. And then also the people responsible and the targeted date for achieving. So this is, you can even use the template for the implementation plan that we gave access to in the energy and in the water section. There you can access this template for the implementation plan, and you can use that same version. And I see that we have one more question here. Yeah, is there any best practice to track chemical lot numbers? In practical per day, there are so many chemicals in-house with different lot numbers. Yes, there are many different possibilities available. So one is to do it all by hand, so do it manually. Of course, if you have lots of different chemicals, then might be really difficult to do it. But some facilities, they still do it manually. Some others, they do it via a software system where they have all their chemicals inventory online in a database, and then they can use that then for the different recipes, etc. that they have. So I know this is very cumbersome and takes a lot of work to set up and to do. But it's still a very strict requirement from Higg FEM and SAC. Another question, For traceability, if a facility do the dyeing in-house and printing outside, how traceability should be verified? Yeah, great question. Then you still need to do the same type of traceability with your subcontracted printing facility. So you basically have to ask them to fulfill your requirements and to establish a traceability system so that you are always on the safe side and can always go back and check if there would be a failure. Okay, question number 15. Does your facility have an implementation plan to reduce the use of hazardous chemicals beyond chemicals specified by regulations and or restricted substances list or MRSLs? And so here we have, this is a very different implementation plan from the previous one in the previous question. This is really about moving away from the most hazardous chemicals. So while you were doing your work with the RSL and MRSL compliance, you might have detected that you are using several chemicals that are still on the MRSL that you need to phase out, or perhaps you have found out that you have chemicals that are on the candidate list for the MRSL, or for example the REACH candidate list. So these chemicals, you know that in the future, at some point in time, you will not be allowed to use these chemicals anymore. And that's why you should begin thinking about that even earlier. And consider how can you phase out those chemicals and accordingly make an implementation plan. And the suggested upload is a hazardous chemical list with an action plan with assigned responsibility and a time frame for action, and alternative chemical trials in laboratory or pilot facility. And now we move on. So we are now beyond compliance, so to say. All the questions at level 1 are really about making sure that you have compliance. And here at level 2, we move beyond compliance. So this question, does your facility source already approved or preferred chemicals from a positive list beyond chemicals specified by regulations and or RSLs and MRSLs? And here the guidance is a bit unclear because there are lots of examples given of so-called positive lists, but that still just have screened against restricted substances list. But here you can see a few examples. The Ocotex has the Eco Passport, that is a declared positive list. You have within the Global Organic Textile Standard, the GOT standard. Excuse me, you have also a list of chemicals that you need to comply to. Bluesign is perhaps the most prominent example of a company that are working a lot with those positive lists, with, so to say, the positive list, you can imagine them as being recommended lists. Obviously, most chemicals are harmful in some way, but there in the Bluesign list, you also have a true positive list, chemicals that have been tested and have been evaluated as being significantly less harmful than other similar chemicals or other chemicals used for the same purpose. And then we also have the CETIC gateway and the different levels there of compliance. And so for facilities that use chemicals in production, you can answer yes here only if more than 50% of the chemical formulations in the inventory are sourced from a positive list. And here you see an example of those. So this is quite challenging. You can only respond yes here if you have more than 50% of the chemicals in compliance and that are sourced from a positive list. And you can answer partial yes if you have chemicals from a positive list that make up less than 50% of your inventory. So I guess that many companies would still be here at partial yes. And here it is enough if you just have a few chemicals that are from a positive list like this. And in order to get there, you do need to have access to those positive lists. So perhaps you need to buy access to the positive list, or you need to become a blue sign partner, for example. And let me see, we have a question here. Yes, my question on chemical section, question number 16, where facilities should source from positive list. So if chemicals are sourced from ZTHC gateway level 1 or 2, will they be counted as positive listed chemicals, or it should be only from level 3? This is a great question. I wonder, shall we go to the how to Higg and have a look if this is specified? Because I am afraid that this might not be exactly described. We will see here in the chemical management, question number 16. Here we have question number 16. Yeah. Such as ZTHC gateway. Here you can see. So I'm not sure if it's possible. I will make it a bit larger here. I hope you can read this. And it is actually described here that you need to have it sourced from a positive list such as ZTHC MRSL level 3. Blue sign, GOTS and or Oekotex or cradle to cradle certified chemical ChemIQ screened. But here to your question, it needs to be at level 3. So it's not enough with level 1 or 2. Yeah, it should only be from level 3. And here 50% chemical ZTHC MRSL level 1 or 2 not included. Yes, it's not included. So it is actually, you need to have level 3 only. So 50% needs to come from level 3. So this is challenging. I am fully aware of this. I think the guidance has been changed in this year as well, because previously you didn't need to have 50%, but now you need to have that. But if you just have 1 or 2 or a few chemicals, you can still answer partial yes. Let me go back here and say, yeah. So here you see answer partial yes. Oh, what is this? This is here. Aha. Excuse me. Yes, now I'm clear again. So for facilities that use chemicals in production, this is where we are talking about 50% at least. If you do not use chemicals in production, then in order to answer yes, you need to have at least 10%. Yeah. So exactly. So it's actually included here as well like this. So if you don't use chemicals in production, then the respective percentage here is 10%. But still, this is really quite challenging. Let us see, we have one more question. If I received a chemical and I already have some quantity in stock, so in the chemical inventory, I must track them to a different lot number for the traceability. Yes, you do need to do that. And exactly, if you do that in your chemical inventory or in any other place, but in any case, you need to mark up the different lot number you will have. Very good questions. Thank you so much for that. All right, so here you can also see some more information. So we were talking about the blue sign, blue finder, set yet CMRSL level 3, the full material disclosure with the TOX assessment, the MRSL positive list for chemicals with IQ screening, and other to be documented by the facility. So those are the options you have. And then question number 17, and now we are already at level 3. Does your facility collaborate with brands and or chemical suppliers to select chemicals for alternatives assessment? And this is one of the easier questions, I would say, at level 3 here. Suggested upload, prioritized list of alternatives for chemicals, MRSL, RSL, the substances of concern list, candidate list, and the minutes from the collaborative meeting between facility customers. So if you are sourcing from a brand, and for example, this brand is asking you to avoid certain chemicals or phase out certain chemicals, then normally you would have a collaboration project with your brand in order to find out which chemicals to focus on. And then in this case, you should be able to respond yes here. But you do need to show that you actually have this collaboration. So it is not enough that you just have received a list from the brand. You do need to be engaging with them also to show that you have this collaboration. Okay, and then question 18, human environmental hazard analysis. Does your facility contribute to chemical analysis against human and environmental hazard criteria to this alternatives process? Well, this is actually quite a significant question and quite challenging. So you can answer yes here if you have a hazardous chemical assessment that has been conducted. And if the facility is using that information to prioritize and have created an action plan with clear implementation towards safer alternatives. So, sorry, I will go back to this question here. So this is really about toxicity assessment. So here you need to have this specific knowledge and expertise in-house in order to do that, or you can, of course, give that project externally to ask an external partner to support you with this. But it is really very challenging usually for a facility itself to do this type of analysis. And this type of analysis is usually an analysis that, for example, Bluesign would be doing. They do this at depth for the different chemicals that they are screening and rating. And then this question 19 might be a bit easier to respond to. Does your facility contribute an analysis of life cycle impacts to this alternatives process? And here we can have the suggested upload would be Bluesign Blue Expert assessment, LCA studies, documented metrics, third-party assessment, and material flow cost accounting. And so, for example, this C here, documented metrics for water, energy, waste. So here, what you can do here is to test another chemical formulation that should be better than with the conventional that you are using. And you can do that if it is possible for you to use one of your dyeing machines, for example, as a testing. But then in that case, you do need to have the different measurement devices over this dyeing machine so that you actually can record how much water am I using, how much energy, what waste, etc. How much better chemicals am I using, and then you can do a comparison, and that would then be acceptable. But actually, this question as well, we very seldom see facilities that are responding with yes to this question. And I see we have one more question here. Okay. Hello, I'm working as ECR in a denim factory. I have noticed that some of the MSD is provided by supplier in the section 2 hazardous identification. It says the mixture is not hazard, but in section 3, hazard ingredients, the substances are hazardous like irritant. In that case, should we consider the chemical as non-hazardous? No, you should not. In my view, there seems that this SDS is not entirely correct. And in the section 3, if you have that it is irritant, then it should usually also be classified as hazardous. It might be differ a bit, but in most cases it should be classified as hazardous. Can you explain about chemical life cycle? Yes, I can. So the chemical life cycle, and you see that in the illustration here to the right, this shows how the product life cycle of a t-shirt, for example, and this is the same applied to chemicals. So we have in order to produce the chemicals, we have the raw materials, perhaps oil or something like that. And then you go into the actual manufacturing of the chemicals, you distribute them. In your facility, perhaps you are using them. Potentially, if you are lucky, you can also even recycle the chemicals. And then we have a landfill here as an example. Landfill is not a super good example for chemicals. So usually, you know that in general, and we talked about that yesterday in the webinar, with the question about avoiding waste to landfill. And of course, we should not be landfilling chemicals because most of them are still hazardous and may then cause contamination and problems in the landfill. But this is basically the life cycle. And so the chemicals that are not recycled, perhaps you need to incinerate them, for example, or if they have to be put in a landfill, they need to be solidified before they are landfilled. So this is also a common practice when you have to landfill hazardous components, that they are first solidified before they are landfilled. And I see that we have one more question coming in here. Okay, that was a thank you. You are welcome. Good. And now the next question, number 20, traceability to lot number. If you were able to respond yes to question 13, then in all cases, you will be able to respond yes to this question as well. And this is about, can your manufacturing process chemicals be traced from product lot number back to chemical lot number? So previously in question 13, we were talking about the manufacturing process and the chemicals used there, for example, in the dyeing process, and then being able to trace back to the origin of the chemical and the chemical supplier. And in this case, we would like to see the full traceability from the final product and then going backwards to the actual manufacturing process and to the chemical supplier and the lot number there. So usually if you have come this far, you have responded yes, probably to question 13, then you can also respond yes to question 20. But of course, you will need to be able to show this, that you have this traceability actually down to the final product. Suggested upload, a product batch card, recipe cards, and the chemical process log, and the chemical storage log. And we have one more question here. Hello, I'm working as an ECR at a denim factory. I want to know if there is any site where we can check chemical hazard signage for cross-match with MSDS by CAS number. I don't think so. I don't know of any such site, unfortunately. Perhaps just Googling, but I'm not sure you can find that. No, I cannot help here. Okay, and then let's move on to the question 21. Does your facility have a documented quality assurance program that includes performance of the chemicals? And so most facilities have a quality assurance program of some place, looking at, for example, the product quality in many different ways. But here we are talking also about including the performance of the chemicals. So you need to have an assurance program where you test the chemicals for their performance. So for example, for a dyeing chemical, does it dye exactly to the extent that you would like it to have? And it should include the evaluation of the quality and performance efficacy of each chemical formulation used, ensuring that the process recipes of how each chemical formulation are to be used are also strictly followed. Process controls are strictly followed, and ongoing assessment of production quality with supporting records are also available. And now question 22, sorry, we have one more question here. Yes, please give some understanding about MFCA. Let's go back there to that question and have a look here. Here we have the material flow cost accounting. I have never seen any example in a facility showing a material flow cost accounting. It is a very specific method where you you have like a similar accounting system that you would have for a financial system. And instead you add your material flows and your costs in there. And then you do basically your accounting. I believe that if you would Google this, you would probably find some more information here. But to be really truthful, I have never seen any example of this in any facility. Yeah. Okay, so the question 21, we were looking at that, and now we have the question 22. And here the question is, do your contractors and or subcontractors source already approved or preferred chemicals from a positive list to replace chemicals not already included in RSL, MRSL? So here it is the same question as for you. And in this case, you should, your contractors or subcontractors, they should also source already approved or preferred chemicals from positive lists. So it should not be that they source according to RSL and MRSL, because those questions we handled already at level 1. This is about going above and beyond and have them also sourcing from, let's say, a blue sign list. So description of the procedures and communication with the suppliers and subcontractors would be expected here. And then any Higg FEM verification report from the suppliers or subcontractors. Final question, but let's see, we have one more question coming in here. Yeah, this information here, MFCA, may be controlled by a software. Yes, I think there are software. I know at least many years ago, there were software programs available for MFCA. Okay, sustainable chemistry innovation. This is the final question in the chemical section, and there's also in the Higg questions. And this is also very far-reaching. Does your facility have documented business goals, processes, and actions showing commitment to new sustainable chemistry innovation? So this is not about just having a chemicals management program in place, but you really need to go very far. You need to have those goals and this commitment by your top management to use new sustainable chemistry innovation. So it's really about moving onwards and replacing all hazardous chemicals, looking for even better chemicals, using innovation to drive the chemical performance. And examples could be salt-free or waterless dyeing, for example. It could be a recovery or reuse of chemicals, bleaching without chemicals, solvent-free processing, electrochemical dyeing process. So, and we know there are lots of initiatives going on, trying to find innovation and trying to drive sustainable chemistry innovation. So there are lots going on, but you need to really have a comprehensive program and goals here in place for innovation. And here we have some other examples of practices. We had the salt-free dyeing, waterless. Yeah, we already had those examples on the previous slide. Sorry. And we can move over to the questions now, because I see, how can I do an LCA anyway? Yes, a life cycle assessment usually is a very comprehensive and very detailed study of the life cycle of a product, or it can be of a chemical. And so this is a specialist area. If you want to do this, you can hire an external consultant to support you, or you can study to become an LCA practitioner. There are lots of courses available to do this, but it is a very, very detailed work you would need to do. If you are a member of Sustainable Apparel Coalition, you can use the product module and then do your simplified life cycle assessment. It's very much simplified, and this is then not for chemicals specifically, but really for products and for textile or footwear products. So this is a very advanced practice. And then the next question is, the greenhouse gas footprint and the LCA the same? No, it is not. Usually in a life cycle assessment, you look at greenhouse gases, but you also look at, for example, chemicals, you look at energy, you look at water, etc. So you have several environmental impact categories that you are analyzing in a life cycle assessment. And the greenhouse gas footprint is then looking only at your greenhouse gas emissions, and may also be a more high-level study than what an LCA would be. And then let us see how much time we have left. Yeah, I think we can take this question as well. I have a question from the waste section also, if time allows. Waste section, question 11, setting target for disposal method. If a food waste is being used as fish food, which disposal method to be selected? And if facilities in certain industrial zone need to sell waste, to a certain vendor and can't choose any other vendor, can they set target on the disposal method as other, or they should validate waste vendors' processes in this case? Okay, let's take this question first. If a facility if they can't choose the vendor, then sometimes you can't choose the waste disposal method either. So you should not set it as other. You need to understand what this waste vendor, which process he or she has in place, and how the waste is treated. So you should not set other. If it's possible, you should try to find out what type of waste disposal method is this contractor actually using. And to your first question, if food waste is being used as fish food, which disposal method to be selected? Yes. I wonder if it would be recycling. Perhaps it would be recycling. And I guess the fish is then also being used later, the fish that you are feeding. I guess it could be recycling. But I could have a look. To this question, and let me see here. Yeah, I will take a note that I will have a look at this question and come back to you. But I guess the only one that would be possible would be recycling, wouldn't it? I guess that would be the best one. And then we have another question. Please explain chemical supply chain mapping. Well, I don't know in which context you have this, but mapping is really about understanding exactly what your supply chain looks like. So this means knowing each and every supplier you have in your chemical supply chain. So you would then go to the chemical supplier where you buy your chemicals from, and you would have the data from that supplier, and then you would ask that supplier, excuse me, to give you the information about the chemical supplies that they are using or any other supplies that they are using. Okay, another question. I already uploaded our Higg FEM self-assessment. Let me see. But I just uploaded environmental objective target and program related to chemical using. Is that okay? Not following the suggested upload. Related to chemical. I'm not entirely sure which question is this related to, or is this general? It doesn't matter in which order you do it. You should always complete the facility and site info section first, but then you can respond to the questions, and you always need to respond to the applicability questions as well. But after that, you can respond to the questions in the order you want. So I'm not sure I understand this question correctly. And then the next question, for the life cycle assessment question in the chemical section, can facility use EIM software generated reported? Yes, I think you can. So that is the one from Genealogia. And yes, I think you can there. All right, and then we have more questions here. Is MRSL and RSL screening process only considered for production chemicals, or is it needed to check all facility chemicals, including ETP, boiler, and other? Yes, you need to check all chemicals. We have several questions coming in here. Should we do LCA of those chemicals that we have a plan to phase out? I don't think you need to do that. If you already know that you want to phase them out, then perhaps you don't need to do an LCA, especially not a detailed LCA, because it's a lot of work to do that. Question 8, level 1. Question 8, level 1. It's related to chemical, but I just uploaded environmental objective target and program. I still don't understand your question. So to question 8, let's go back to question number 8. And you just uploaded. I'm still not sure I really understand your question here. Sorry for that. Okay, let's see if we have more questions. All right. Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. All right. So Inna, I'm not sure I understand your question here. Question 8, and what you meant with the uploaded. Not following the suggested. Yeah, I'm not sure I understand this. So let's move on for now and see if you can add some more information to me there. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to the end. I see we're already 1 minute past, so we will close here. I also want to show you our great verifiers. Many of them are chemical specialist verifiers, and you can contact them here and ask for a proposal. And then we also have the entire series of webinars about the Higg FEM. We have just concluded the chemical management one here. And of course, we would be happy to support you with any verification. And see here you see our entire team. And now I see that we have one more question here. Okay, there were a few thank you here from the audience. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for today. And I wish you all the best with your self-assessment and with your verification. And also don't forget this last sentence here. Don't forget to post your module by April 30th, which is the deadline in most cases. Yes, and everyone will receive this slide deck and the recording after the webinar. So don't worry about that. All right, you take care, everyone. Bless you. All the best. Bye-bye. Bye.